you find me in my happy place, because I'm at the wheel of a Ford Fiesta ST. I make no secret of the fact that for me, the Fiesta ST is one of the best performance cars on sale today at any money. I love it. The Fiesta ST has been at the top of its game for years, but now it's got a very credible new rival. It's Korean, it's got very angular styling, and it comes from the same people who gave us the excellent Hyundai i20N.
This is the smaller, cheaper and less powerful i20N. It's such a perfect match for the Fiesta ST. The two cars could almost be twins with different bodies on top. Both have turbocharged engines with around 200 horsepower plus 6-speed manual gearboxes. They're almost exactly the same size. Both weigh around 1,200 kilograms, the Ford is slightly heavier, and both will sprint to 62 miles per hour in just over 6 seconds. But there are some key differences.
For example, the Hyundai has got a 4-cylinder engine while the Ford has got a little 3-pot. Meanwhile, the Fiesta ST is quite a lot cheaper. It starts at around £22,000 compared to £25,000 for the i20N. However, it's worth pointing out that with the Hyundai, you get a limited slip differential as standard. To get one of those on the Fiesta ST, you have to pay £24,500 on the ST3 model. Finally, this one is the Fiesta ST Edition. It's the top spec model. It costs almost £29,000, but you get the diff plus manually adjustable coilovers.
The ST's cabin is a bit dark and gloomy, but the quality is fine, the seating position is good, and the seats themselves are excellent. The i20N's cabin has harder plastics than the Ford's, and its seating position isn't quite so good. The seats aren't as supportive either, but it's loaded with kit, and look, there's a fire graphic in the instrument display when you switch into a sport mode.
What makes this little Ford so special? As far as I'm concerned, there's a handful of things that are right at the heart of it. I want to talk about the major controls, the steering, the gear shift, the pedals, because they're all so cohesive in their weighting and their rate of response. That might sound like a minor detail, but what it means for the driver is that you sit in this car and drive it and feel like you're operating a super high quality machine. It just feels cohesive, all of a piece, and as though Ford's engineers have thought about every tiny detail. And I want to talk about the way this thing goes through corners, because that's where the real fun in the Fiesta ST is. You turn into a bend and immediately appreciate how good the steering is. It's crisp, it's quick, it's really sharp. The rate of response from the front axle is spot on. And then the instant you turn into a bend, you feel the car rotate underneath you in the most beautiful, fluid way. The rear end seems to sweep around behind you. The car rolls and leans a little bit as it does so. And so you just have this wonderful sensation of flowing through corners. It's there. When you tip it into a corner and it rotates right around its gear lever, and then at the apex, you stand on the throttle and use that differential to drag you away with really good traction. It's so much fun. And then on top of all of that, you've got a strong engine. It's so energetic, it's so responsive. You've got a great gear shift. I love the seats, they're super supportive. The seating position is really good as well. Yeah, and all of that in one package gives you a car that on the public road, in the real world, is so much fun to drive. That's the key thing. In the real world where we have other traffic, speed cameras, speed limits, horses, pedestrians, all that other stuff that makes us slow down. Even in amongst all of that, the Fiesta ST is so fun to drive. And that is what the Hyundai i20N has got to live up to. It's a hell of a lot to live up to. So i20N then, what are your first impressions? The seating position isn't quite as good as the Fords. There's not much in it, but you don't sit quite as low in this car, and the steering wheel doesn't come out quite as far. It means that your relationship between all the major controls and the seat isn't quite as good, but it's pretty marginal. In this car, there's a fairly bewildering array of drive modes. I can choose 3 different settings for the engine, the steering, the rev matching, 3 settings for the rev matching, the stability control, and the exhaust sound. 3 different settings for the exhaust sound. Isn't 2 enough? Isn't 1 enough? It all means that you spend quite a long time trying to figure out what the best mode is for a given road. But like that Ford, this Hyundai is on fixed rate dampers, so there isn't a button I can push to change the ride quality at all. Speaking of ride quality, in that sense, these 2 cars feel very similar. Quite tense, quite stiff. They've both got very short wheelbases, they're sporty little hot hatches, so they're going to have busy rides. But they're not brittle, they're not crashy or tense, never really uncomfortable. On certain surfaces, you can feel the suspension working hard just to breathe a bit, just to absorb the worst of the imperfections in the road surface. So neither car is really crashy, but they both can be quite bouncy. So the bodies tend to leap up and down a bit over a bumpy road, and your head tends to bob about all over the place. That's to be expected, I think. Let's talk about the engine. They've got very, very similar performance, these 2 cars. Almost exactly the same, in fact. What you don't get in this Hyundai is those perfectly matched control weights. So the gear shift feels quite light. It's a good shift, but it feels lighter than you would expect given the resistance met by the ball of your foot when you depress the clutch pedal. The engine itself, it's strong, it's responsive. It doesn't have quite the same energy through the mid-range and into the top end. It tends to fade after about 6,000 RPM, where the Fiesta ST's engine keeps ripping until it hits the limiter. And then you stick it into some corners. The steering is pretty good. It's at its best for me, just in normal mode. I don't want it in Sport or Sport Plus. Normal, it's at its best. The moment you turn into a corner, this car does something very similar to the Fiesta ST. Let me demonstrate. Hard on the brakes, turn in, feel the back of the car begin to swing around enough that you just open the steering, let the car rotate around the apex, stand on the power, use the differential to drag you away. It's a very, very similar set of characteristics to the Ford. Very similar. Actually, for me, it's not quite as gracefully done. I have to say, this isn't the car I was expecting. I first drove the i20N at the end of last summer, back in September. It was a prototype. They still had lots of tuning work to do, and there was still a long way to go with its development. But talking to the engineers, talking to the people who worked for Hyundai, I got a very clear sense that they kind of felt that Ford's approach with the ST was a bit silly, that it's very expressive handling, the way it wants to rotate around a corner, was a bit contrived. And yet, in this car, I find very responsive, sharp steering. In this car, I find a little hot hatch that wants to oversteer and rotate into a corner the moment you turn in, just like the Fiesta. I thought Hyundai would take a very different direction with this car. But then, when you choose one of the go faster modes, you get that ring of fire graphic. They call the drive modes grin control, grin. And in the way this car gets through corners, I hear echoes of the Fiesta ST. I don't know if that was Hyundai's intention at all. Those are just my impressions. But hey, if you're going to mimic any hot hatch, it might as well be the Fiesta ST, one of the best hot hatches, as far as I'm concerned, there's ever been. At the end of the day, this i20N is a huge amount of fun. It's really entertaining to drive. It's capable as well, and it's quick. For me, it's just not quite as good as that brilliant little Ford.
The Ford Fiesta ST remains the best car of its type, but the Hyundai i20N doesn't disgrace itself. It's quick, fun, and very usable day to day. My happy place, though, is still in the comforting embrace of the Fiesta ST's Recaro seat. Not yet subscribed to the PistonHeads YouTube channel? Go on, click the button now.